Breaking news. Silver stackers. Flock, largest coin show in USA. What I witnessed at the F.U.N. show 2026 will keep you up at night. Dealers with empty tables, premiums skyrocketing, lines stretching around the block, and one conversation that revealed something the mainstream media won't tell you. A warning so urgent that even the most seasoned collectors are changing their entire strategy. Right now, as you watch this, something is shifting in the physical silver market. Something that hasn't happened in over a decade. And if you're not positioned correctly, you might miss the biggest opportunity or face the worst mistake of your financial life. What I'm about to show you from Florida? Welcome to Currency Archive, where we preserve the truth about money that others try to bury. My friend, if you've been following markets for years, if you remember when silver meant something real, when a handshake still mattered in business, then do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button below. Not for me, but because this information needs to reach people like you, people who still think independently. And tell me, where are you watching from today? Are you in Texas, California, perhaps overseas? Drop your location in the comments. I'm curious how far this message is traveling. Now, let me show you what's really happening in Florida. The sun was barely rising over Orlando, Florida, when something unusual began to happen at the Orange County Convention Center. A line was forming. Not just any line, but a line that stretched around the corner, down the escalators, and out into the parking lot. People were arriving hours before the doors opened. Some had driven through the night. Others had flown in from across the country. A few had even come from overseas. They were all heading to the same place, the F.U.N. show 2026, one of the largest coin shows in America. But this year was different. Alex stood behind his booth at Stacker Vault, watching the crowd pour in like a flood. He had been coming to this show for years, but he had never seen anything like this. This is pandemonium, he said, shaking his head in disbelief. The energy in this room is just wild. He wasn't exaggerating. Dealers were selling out of products within hours. Tables that were usually full of inventory were becoming empty. The noise level was deafening as thousands of people pushed through the aisles, searching for silver and gold. Hayden from SD Bullion had been attending the F.U.N. show since he was 12 years old. That was over 20 years ago. He had seen busy shows before, but nothing compared to this. There's got to be 1,000+ people waiting in that line to come in, he said, his eyes wide. I've never seen anything like this for any U.S. coin show. He paused and looked around the packed convention hall. I've been to the Berlin World Money Fair every year, and there's a big line there, but we got a longer line out here right now. Something was happening in the precious metals market. Something big. Just months earlier, silver was trading at $60 an ounce, and most people weren't paying attention. Coin shops couldn't give it away. The public had no interest. But now, silver had climbed to $80 an ounce. And suddenly, everyone wanted it. Ken, one of the owners of U.S. Coins in Houston, had been watching this shift happen in real time. His shop was one of the largest coin shops in America, and he had seen the transformation with his own eyes. At $60 silver, we couldn't give it away, he explained. And at $80 silver, we've got lines out the door. It was a complete reversal. For years, the silver stacking community had been talking about this moment. They had been warning people. They had been saying that global demand would eventually catch up, that the dollar would weaken, that silver would break free from its suppression. Ken had been listening to these voices for 7 or 8 years. All of the rhetoric and things that we heard that they were preaching about are coming to pass, he said. And I think it's great for the whole hobby. But it wasn't just the price that had changed. The entire market was shifting. Trent, the head of trading for Elemetal, one of the biggest refiners in America, was dealing with something he had never experienced before. For weeks, his refinery had stopped accepting 90% silver and sterling silver from coin shops, not because they didn't want it, but because they were completely backlogged. It was a market industry issue, Trent explained. It was just a backlog of all refiners, whether it be in America, whether it be in Europe and China, that were just backlogged. The demand was so intense that leasing rates for silver had jumped to 200% for just the daily roll. Silver was flooding back into the market faster than refiners could process it. Even though companies like Elemetal were investing in more refining capabilities, even though they were ordering new machines from Asia and Europe, it wasn't enough. It just takes time to get those machines and to really ramp things up, Trent said. And then he said something that sent chills down people's spines. If we get to $100 silver, it just changes the whole market and whole dynamic of the market. $100 silver, it wasn't a fantasy anymore. It was becoming a real possibility. Back at the F.U.N. show, the crowds kept coming. The dealers kept selling. The premiums kept rising. And everyone had the same question on their minds. What happens next? There was a moment in late 2025 when coin shop owners across America started to panic. They were calling refineries, sending emails, trying to understand what was happening. Because suddenly, the refineries weren't buying their silver anymore, not the pure silver rounds or bars, but the 90% silver coins, the old American dimes and quarters, and the sterling silver flatware and jewelry that had always been easy to sell. The refineries had stopped taking it. For decades, this system had worked like clockwork. Coin shops would buy junk silver from the public, then ship it off to refineries like Elemetal, and the refineries would melt it down and turn it back into pure silver. But now, that system had broken. Trent sat in his office at Elemetal headquarters, staring at the mountain of orders piling up. His phone wouldn't stop ringing. Coin dealers were desperate for answers. "Why aren't you taking our silver?" they asked. The answer was simple, but terrifying. They were drowning in silver. It was just a backlog of all refiners, Trent explained. Whether it be in America, whether it be in Europe and China, everyone was just backlogged. The refineries couldn't keep up with the volume. Silver was coming back into the market so fast that even the biggest refineries in the world were overwhelmed. They had warehouses full of 90% silver waiting to be processed. But the machines could only run so fast. And there was something else happening, something even more concerning. The leasing rates for silver had exploded. Normally, banks and institutions could lease silver at a small percentage, maybe 1 or 2% annually. It was a quiet, stable market that most people never paid attention to. But recently, those rates had jumped to 200%. 200%, just for the daily roll. That meant institutions were paying massive premiums just to have access to physical silver for a single day. 4 to 8 weeks. That meant if someone ordered a Sigma verifier today, they wouldn't receive it for 1 to 2 months. Huge demand, Alex said. A lot of influx of new customers coming into this market. A lot of new money. The question wasn't whether silver would continue to rise. The question was, could the system handle what was coming? And based on what Trent was seeing at Elemetal, the answer was no. It just is so much silver coming back into the market, Trent said, his voice heavy with the weight of what he was witnessing. Even though Elemetal was investing in more refining capabilities, even though they were ordering new machines from Asia and Europe, it would take months for those machines to arrive and be installed. Just imagine trying to get stuff over from Asia, stuff over from Europe, Trent explained. It just takes time to get those machines and to really ramp things up to a point where we're back to normal. But then he paused, which may not be the case if we get to $100 silver. $100 silver. At $60, the refineries were already struggling. At $80, they were backlogged for months. What would happen at $100? Trent had done a podcast just weeks earlier where he had talked about how scary $70 silver would be for the refining industry. Well, we're at 80 now, he said with a nervous laugh. So $100 silver just changes the whole market and whole dynamic of the market. It was a stair-step approach. Every time silver jumped another $10 or $20, the entire supply chain had to adjust. Refineries had to ramp up production. Manufacturers had to order more equipment. Dealers had to find new sources of inventory. But there was a limit to how fast the system could adapt. Meanwhile, back at the F.U.N. show in Orlando, the crowds were getting bigger. Alex from Stacker Vault was standing at his booth, completely sold out of Sigma Metalytics, precious metals verifiers. As Sigma's largest global distributor, I can say for the first time in history we are completely sold out, he announced to anyone who would listen. We are backordered 4 to 8 weeks on any new orders. There was something strange happening at the F.U.N. show that caught everyone off guard. The average age of precious metals buyers was dropping. For decades, the coin and precious metals market had been dominated by older collectors, men in their 50s, 60s, and 70s who had been stacking silver since the 1980s. But now, something had shifted. Young faces were everywhere. Isaac from Premier Rare Coins stood at his booth watching the crowd flow past him. He had only been a dealer for about a year and a half, but even he could see the change. "This is my 3rd fun show," he said, looking around in amazement. "And the first 2 that I went to last year. This is almost like 2 or 3 times the amount of people." He paused, counting the dealers stretched across the massive convention hall. "I imagine we're getting probably 10,000 to 15,000 people walking through here." But it wasn't just the size of the crowd that shocked him. It was who was in the crowd. Trent from Elemetal had noticed it too. From his position as head of trading for one of America's biggest refiners, he had a unique view of the market. "Our demographic is younger for this market," he explained. "I mean, you just look at the people casting and pouring and whatnot. It is a youth movement." He wasn't imagining it. The data backed it up. "Our demographic is growing and being younger and hungry," Trent continued. "They want these things. They want cool products. They want to invest and see the value of investing in silver and gold compared to the US dollar." This wasn't the typical coin collector crowd anymore. These were young people in their 20s and 30s. People who had grown up watching the financial crisis of 2008, who had seen inflation eat away at their paychecks, who had watched Bitcoin rise and fall, and who were now turning to precious metals as a hedge against an uncertain future. They weren't interested in rare coins with historical value. They wanted silver rounds. They wanted bars. They wanted weight. And they were buying in record numbers. Hayden from SD Bullion had seen this firsthand. His company was one of the largest online precious metals dealers in America, and their sales numbers told an incredible story. Record numbers, he said simply. I mean, the retail public is buying in a big way. But it wasn't just that people were buying. It was that they were buying more ounces than ever before. Trent had been talking to a big online retailer that sold Elemental products, and they had told him something that even he didn't believe at first. They were like, "It is better now than it was during COVID," Trent said, still processing the statement. COVID had been the biggest buying frenzy in precious metals history. People had panicked. Supply chains had collapsed. Premiums had skyrocketed. And now, 2026 was surpassing it. They were talking about pure ounces, Trent clarified. If you talk about gross or dollar amount, you're like, spot prices doubled or tripled. That's a different story. But they're talking about pure ounces, pure customers, interest in our market. More silver was moving through the system than ever before, and it wasn't slowing down. Back at the F.U.N. show, Alex from Stacker Vault was experiencing the same surge. He had brought his lockable, stackable precious metals storage containers to the show, expecting normal sales. Instead, he was selling out. "We're completely sold out of a lot of our products," he said, gesturing to his nearly empty booth. "I've never seen anything like this." The Sigma verifiers were gone. The stacker vaults were disappearing. Everything was moving. "Unprecedented attendance right now," Alex said. "Demand, price action, everything in the market is driving this." Ken from US Coins in Houston had been watching this transformation for years. He had been talking to the stacker community for 7 or 8 years, listening to their warnings, their predictions, their concerns, and now it was all coming true. "All of the rhetoric and things that we heard that they were preaching about are coming to pass," Ken said. "The young generation had arrived. They were hungry. They were informed. They were buying. And the market was about to change forever." There was a conversation happening quietly in the corners of the F.U.N. show, a conversation that most people weren't paying attention to, while everyone else was celebrating the rising prices, while dealers were bragging about record sales, while young stackers were loading up on silver rounds. A few experienced voices were whispering a warning. Joe from Beantown Coins sat at his booth, surrounded by ancient coins and rare numismatics. He had been in this business long enough to recognize patterns. He had seen bull markets before. He had seen crowds rush in at the top. He had seen fortunes made and fortunes lost. And he was watching it happen again. "I think that gold will continue to rise slowly over the course of the next year," Joe said carefully, choosing his words. "And that silver will outperform it, probably by a pretty wide margin." That sounded bullish. But then he said something that made people stop and think. "If anybody is looking for a top to claim in their silver market, I would not personally want to be a holder of much silver if the gold to silver ratio reaches anywhere like around 20 to 1. 20 to 1. Right now, the ratio was sitting somewhere around 90 to 1. That meant it took 90 ounces of silver to buy 1 ounce of gold. But if silver kept climbing faster than gold, if the frenzy continued, that ratio could drop to 50 to 1, then 40, then 30. And if it reached 20 to 1, whatever the prices are at that moment, Joe continued, then at that point, silver is starting to get overvalued relative to gold, and that's where I would not want to have that much. It was a contrarian view. While everyone else was screaming, "Buy, buy, buy," Joe was quietly suggesting that there would come a time to sell, a time to rotate out of silver and into gold, a time to take profits before the market turned. Greg, from Heritage Auctions, had a different perspective. His company was the largest coin auction house in the world, and he had seen billions of dollars worth of rare coins change hands over the years. He wasn't worried about silver stackers. He was watching the global economy. "I just know that with instability in the world and the economic situations," Greg explained, "it looks like a lot of other countries would rather hold gold than US dollars." That was the real story. Central banks around the world were dumping US dollars and buying gold. They were diversifying away from American debt. They were preparing for something. "And that's what I've heard is causing a lot of the increase and a lot of the price pressure," Greg said. "And if that's the case, I don't see it letting up anytime soon." The implications were staggering. If foreign nations didn't want US dollars anymore, if they were losing faith in the American financial system, then the entire global monetary structure was at risk, and precious metals were the lifeboat. Trent from Elemetal had his own concerns. He was on the ground floor of the supply chain, watching silver flow through the refineries in real time. "I don't know what's happening," Trent admitted honestly. "I don't know what's going to happen in the market." But then he said something that revealed his true position. $100 seems certainly possible, so it pays to be long, you could say. $100 silver. It was the number everyone kept coming back to. At $100, the entire precious metals market would transform, refineries would be overwhelmed, premiums would explode, physical shortages would become severe. The gap between paper silver and physical silver would widen into a chasm. Ken from US Coins had already made his decision. He had been listening to the stacker community for nearly a decade, and everything they had predicted was coming true. "I'm very bullish on this market," Ken said confidently. "Normally I think when the public gets involved, it's probably wrong." He paused. "But I kind of feel like the public's right on this one." Back in the convention hall, the crowds continued to surge. The line outside was still wrapped around the building. Dealers were still selling out, and somewhere in the back of everyone's mind, a clock was ticking.